Hello, I'm artist Wanaree Tanner here at Cool Tools to demonstrate how to make my new sliding pendant. Here you can see this is the piece we're going to be creating. And it's just got a little slider inset there so you can feed chain straight into it and wear a nice, delicate, kind of a refined look. A little more modern. What we'll need for this project, this is my signature Asian Design Set 2 texture plate. We'll be using this design here to create this focal. You'll notice there's rolling tracks on either sides of the textures to give you space to set up your rolling frames. You'll also see that there are spillover grooves worked inside the plate that helps the clay to escape as it's being rolled out, which will yield a more consistent and even texture. You'll also need a ceramic tile. This is what we're going to use as our work surface. And I prefer to use EZ960 Sterling because when we get these really fine, delicate walls, this is going to be stronger and last a long time without any problems at all. I also like to use a little clay humidifier to store my clay. A plastic rolling barrier, which I'll be demonstrating later. A roller. You'll want a nice fine brush. This is a 12-aught Princeton mini angle shader brush. It's got a really fine tip to it and a nice short handle, which makes it really easy to work with. You'll also want a sanding surface. I prefer alpha abrasive sanding sticks because they're small and they can get into smaller areas. This is a 100-180 grit. You'll also need a needle tool to cut our design out. And these foam tools we'll use for wet refinement, which I'll demonstrate later. A little bit of water as well, and you'll want to have a lubricant. I like to use Cool Tools Cool Slip. So we're ready to get started. So this project will use about 6 grams of clay total. It doesn't take a lot to make it. You'll want to start out with 10 just so you have extra to spare. First we're going to spray the rolling barrier with just a light coat of lubricant. You want to work from a little distance away when you spray, because you don't need a lot. I'm going to stick that right inside the rolling barrier. Then I'm going to put my rolling frame right on top of it. This is going to help prevent the clay from actually sticking to your roller as you're rolling it out. So I'm just going to start working it into the shape that we need to fit our texture plate. Okay, remove our rolling frame. Then we're going to want to lubricate our texture plate. Again, spray from a little distance away because you don't need a ton of lubricant, just a little bit. If this is your first time using the texture plate, you might use your fingers to work that lubrication into this. Next, we're going to texture down with a 2-card rolling frame. We're just going to position it into place here, giving us room for our clay. Place our slab right on top of our design. You see I've got the rolling barrier still in place. You want to leave that rolling barrier in place while you texture it down so that the clay doesn't stick to the roller. This will actually keep the clay inside the texture plate, preventing ghosting from occurring. So you want to make sure to roll in one direction firmly. So I'm going to start at this end and just press down and roll it out. You don't want to go back and forth. When you go back and forth, you can actually cause ghosting of lines. So just go back in and burnish the backside of your clay. This is going to help work the clay into the fine details of that texture. And again, this barrier is keeping us from sticking to that clay surface and pulling it off that texture plate and causing ghosting. Now we can remove our plastic barrier, remove our frame. So I'm just going to take this whole assembly with the clay in place inside the texture plate and a ceramic tile in my other hand. I'm going to flip this right onto the surface there. This is going to prevent the clay from becoming dislodged and hold that shape nice and clean. You want to pick up your clay as little as possible. Every time you pick your clay up, you're actually distorting your design. So now I'm burnishing this from the backside so that our clay will release onto the tile. And then just peel back. You can see you have a beautiful, clean impression. To cut this out, I like to use a fine needle tool here. So you want to watch where it is that you're headed as opposed to where you're at right now. So start at a point here and just drag your needle tool. If you'll notice too, these texture plates actually create cutting grooves around those designs, making it a little easier for you to remove the image without distorting the borders. So I'm just going to pull my needle right around. And if you notice, I'm not putting a lot of pressure down. I'm not bearing down on that needle. I'm just allowing the blade to just drag right through the clay. There's no pressure involved. And actually, the looser that you grip your cutting tool, the more relaxed you'll be able to be, and the cleaner your cuts will be. Now that you've cut this out, you can just remove your excess clay and place it back into your humidifier. Now we're going to repeat this process with the center. Again, I'm going to start here at the point and work my way down the middle. And with just a light amount of pressure, I'm just dragging it through the clay. Again, there's no bearing down that's going on with this. Just drag it through. And flip it and work it from the other edge. If you try to cut it into that corner there, you can actually bunch up the clay. And pull out the excess clay. Now we're going to put that into our dehydrator until it's dried completely. Repeat for a second side because we're going to do a pendant that's both front and back. Once your piece is completely dry, we're ready for refinement. I start off with a little bit of sand refining, and you don't need to do a lot of work at all. You just barely touch the edges of your piece with the Alpha Abrasive Sanding Stick. It's just to remove that excess debris. It's not a whole lot there. So now we're ready to wet refine. I like to use this foam tool for my wet refinement process. What it actually does, instead of removing material the way sandpaper does, it moves it around. So if you've got a high spot and a low spot, you can actually rub that high spot down into that low spot and get a nice smooth edge. The same thing with cracks or fissures. This will actually help heal that surface. And all I'm going to do is just dip it just a little bit in water, and you can wipe it off. You don't need a lot. I say wet refinement, but you really want to think damp. I like to test the moisture on my thumb there. I'm just rubbing the border edge, and you can see how quickly that edge cleans up. That's a wonderful thing about 960 is it refines so quickly. And just with a little bit of water. And do it on the inside of the piece as well. So you can see I'm bracing the piece with my fingers as I'm working because again 960 is really flexible when it's still in greenware. So if you get a buildup of material on your foam tool, just make sure to wipe it off occasionally so that you're not redepositing that material into an area that you don't want it to be in. So you can see just a little rub there and it's erased that line away and given us a nice clean border. If you accidentally deposit paste onto your texture plate, clean off your foam tool completely and then just do a dry brushing. This dry rub is actually going to pull any excess paste that might have gotten deposited on your texture surface from that wet refining process. And you can see now your piece is ready. So you just want to repeat the process on the second side so that you have two, one for the back and one for the front. As you can see here, you've got the front and the back of the pendant are matched. The nice thing about this technique of using the ceramic tile with a texture plate and transferring it in that manner is you get a consistent shape. If you picked up that sheet of textured clay and cut it out and then did a second piece and picked it up and cut it out, you'd have some distortion. The pieces wouldn't line up as well as these do. We're just going to have a centerpiece in the middle and between those two, front and back, and then cut a channel in between that piece so that we can run a chain through it. The first thing we're going to want to do is roll out our middle slab. So I'm going to take my plastic rolling barrier, and you might notice your plastic rolling barrier will start to curl a little bit with use. Don't worry about it, it's not a big deal. They are disposable and they'll wear out after a time. So I'm just going to place my 8-card rolling frame inside my rolling barrier. And I want to roll out a slab that's going to be big enough for these pieces. So we're going to roll our clay down so that it's big enough to cover our entire design here. And just check to make sure, and that looks pretty good. Open our rolling barrier, remove our frame, then we can transfer this directly onto the ceramic tile. So the next thing we're going to do is use this as a stencil to cut out that middle piece for us. And again, I'm using my sharp needle tool, and you don't have to bear down heavily, just drag it through the clay. So you just want to position it and hold it into place. Typically I use my other hand to brace the piece, again gently, I'm not bearing down on anything. And I'm just dragging the needle right around. You do want to make sure to work your needle tip perpendicular. If you cut in this way or cut out that way, you're going to have a beveled edge. So I'm going to get a nice straight edge. So we're going to drag it through our second side here, and I'm just holding this with my fingertips to keep it in place because it will slide around. So now you can take your excess clay and put it away. Then next we can kind of just center this, make sure it's in a good position, and we're going to cut out the centerpiece as well. Now the tile is going to hold that slab into place, so it won't slide around. That way we'll keep our shape nice and clean. We're just going to pick the panel up and use a straight blade. Now this is a little heavier than a tissue blade. It's also sharper, so you do have to be careful when you're using it. And all we're going to do is cut channels into this middle piece so that there's a place for us to feed a chain through. So I'm just going to take a notch here and then follow that same angle coming in from the other direction. And then we're just going to cut a channel big enough for the chain that you want to use. In this case it's about 5 millimeters, but you don't have to be completely exact about it. You can see I'm kind of bracing the clay as I cut it so it doesn't pick up. Now we're just going to take that and pull it away. Now with this still in place on your tile, you're going to go ahead and attach that front panel. All we're going to use is water. EZ960 features really fine metal particles, so it makes it really easy to make clean, consistent joins. So all I'm doing is I'm taking my foam tool, dipping it in some water, and I'm just liberally brushing water on the surface so that it covers the entire surface. Then I'm just going to take my panel, move it in position, and then with the handle of my brush, I can just press gently. So I'm not pressing the clay out. It's not squishing out of the sides. We're just attaching it. Once that's attached, take your brush, dip it in some water, and just brush up. And what this is doing is this is actually healing that seam in between the center and the front piece. We'll be able to do more refinement later on, but we just want to get that attachment. So we're just going to keep working that edge and work around our piece until those seams are healed. Next, you want to work the water with the brush on the inside of the join. If you notice, I'm always brushing up from the back plate into the piece. If you brush back and forth, you're actually going to open that seam. Brush in one direction so you're always closing the seam. Once you've brushed all of your seams closed, go ahead and put the whole piece in your dehydrator until it's completely dry. Once your piece is completely dry, we're ready now to attach the back panel. You can see just lift it up off your work surface and it's attached. You can see the seam is really nice and smooth on the edge too. To make that final attachment, since the pieces are dry, you'll want to mix up a paste. So I just have a little bit of EZ960 and I'm just going to mix water right into it. Since that particle size is so fine, you don't need any other additives in your paste. This makes a really strong, secure connection with just water. Then all I'm going to do is come in and just swipe a thin layer right on top. Don't worry about paste getting deposited on the sides there. We'll be able to clean it up. And then you can just come in with a little bit of water and kind of re-moisten it a little bit to help make that join nice and secure. I'm just going to orient my piece right on top here. Make sure my sides are even. And you can actually pick it up and check it from the sides, pressing together to make that attachment. Now come in with your foam tool and you can just wipe off some of that excess paste that might have gotten squished out. You want to be careful not to deposit paste onto the surface of the texture because it can ruin the design. So I'm working very easily here just around the edges. For refinement, if you have a lot of big gaps like that, you can take some paste and just work it right in to the seam. Now that's plenty of paste. We probably didn't need quite that much. I'm going to wipe it off, take off the excess, and put that back onto the work surface. Now to smooth that seam, again I'm going to use the foam tool. I say work wet and wet refinement, but I really mean damp. So you want to wipe that moisture off occasionally on your finger just to check. You don't want to flood it with a bunch of water. And see, that's all that it takes, just a little swipe across. And here where you have a seam visible, start by working in little circles with the damp tip, then flip it over to the dry side and wipe it smooth. Any material that gets left, just wipe it right off. Make sure to check the front that you didn't accidentally deposit paste on the front or back. And you'll just continue to refine in this way until you've gone all the way around your piece. Next we'll refine the inside as well. Again, working damp, not wet. Now I've got a little bit too much moisture on there, so I want to be careful. Wipe some of that away, dry it off, and then just work the remaining moisture right along that edge there. So you can see how quick it is to heal those seams. And then repeat that with the other side as well. You can also take your paintbrush and go in and work the holes a little bit just to smooth them out. This is just going to clean up our edges slightly. And the same thing with the exterior. You can see there's a little notch in there. Not a big deal, we're just going to wipe it smooth. So we're just cleaning up the hole a little bit here and getting a nice clean edge. You can do a final swipe through with the foam tool. I'm going to flip it because that's way too much moisture on there. And just do a final pass. If you get any clumps like that, just use the tool to wipe it right up. Then check the surface to make sure there aren't any cracks or fissures that need to be repaired. This is a really fine, detailed texture plate, so I'm going to leave it just the way that it is. Once everything's refined, you want to make sure to put this back in the dehydrator. All that moisture and water that we incorporated to refine the piece can actually wick inside the clay and soften it, so we want to dry it completely before firing. Once the pendant is completely dry, we're ready to fire. You want to fire on a ceramic kiln shelf. I like to use a little bit of alumina hydrate as well. It acts almost as a lubricant for the piece so that when it shrinks it doesn't distort. If you're not familiar with metal clay shrinks as it fires. While it's shrinking, it pulls together and it can actually distort the piece. Now for pieces like this, it may not be as big of an issue because they're smaller, but even so, I like to fire it because of this opening. It'll actually keep the opening the same shape that it was when you put it in there. So I'm just going to dust a little bit onto the shelf. Doesn't take much. Be careful not to aspirate it. You don't want to pour a whole bunch and kick a bunch of dust up. Just shake the shelf a little bit. This is going to cause it to flatten out. Now these little tiny particles are now going to sit under our greenware. And as it fires and shrinks, it's going to act like a little lubricating agent that's going to help it pull together smoothly and evenly. Now I'll just put this into my kiln. If you have a muffle kiln, you'll want to fire at 1675 for 2 hours. Or you can fire it at a lower temperature for longer. We just want to make sure that it's fully sintered. Now we're ready to fire. Once your piece is fired, allow it to cool to room temperature before handling. Here my piece is ready to be finished. If you notice a little discoloration, don't worry about it. It's just the burning of the alumina hydrate. Sometimes the alumina hydrate will actually come out of the kiln darkened. This isn't a big problem and you don't need to throw it away. You can continue to use it. Just brush it right off the piece. For patina, I like to use Black Max, which turns the silver surface black instantly. And you don't have to clean the surface of your piece. You can patina right onto that fire scale. You just want to make sure to wear gloves because it is caustic. So all I'm going to do is take a Q-tip, and it takes very little Black Max. Just on that wet Q-tip, you can see there it changes it immediately. So just dab all the way around. Then you want to rinse your piece in a little bit of water. When you rinse your piece, make sure your water is the same temperature as your black max. If your water is really hot or really cold, it can sometimes cause a white film to develop on top of the surface. Once your piece is patinaed, we can polish the surface and reveal the texture. I like to use 3M 400 grit polishing papers. I cut my pieces into smaller squares that are a little bit more easy to manage. What I like to do too is I'll fold my polishing paper together so that it got a little firmer edge. Now we're just going to hold our piece in place and begin polishing the surface. So folding the paper gives it a little harder edge so you can work it into those details. You can just work that way all the way around. Now you can hand finish this entire piece, including the sides, with a 3M polishing papers. But if you want to make a little less work for yourself, you can use this Dremel coarse radial disc brush. It's similar to the 3M radial bristle disc brushes, but they're a little heavier, so it can really sand down that surface and make it nice and even and smooth. Now you don't want to use it on the texture surface because you could actually remove the texture if you were too aggressive with this tool. I've got it on my portable mini micromotor, which is a lightweight, easy to use, rechargeable hand tool. You'll notice too, it's really quiet. All I'm going to do now is take that brush and just start working the edge. And turn that up a little bit. So that just takes a lot of that elbow grease work out of the process. You can just do that all the way on the edge. Now if you wanted to, you could switch to a finer grit radial bristle disc brush, but I find that just using this one disc is enough, and then you can put it right in the tumbler. And I know that still looks really rough in comparison to the polished piece, but I just took this in this form, where it is now, put it in the tumbler for about half an hour, and it comes out with this shiny, beautiful, smooth edge. Now this piece just needs to be tumbled, and all we have to do is add a chain, and we've got a sliding pendant. Thanks for watching.
Visit our Learning Center at cooltools.us for more cool jewelry making videos. Subscribe to our YouTube channel, like us on Facebook, follow us on Twitter, and be sure to sign up for our email list to be the first to hear about new videos, new products, and other cool stuff from Cool Tools.